the Beatles were on the scene, going around playing probably nightclubs full of Nazis at some point or another, let's be real. And this Brian Epstein guy saw him and saw an opportunity. He was like, oh, we're going to give these guys all the same haircut, dress them the same, steal incredible music made by Black American musicians, and have 4 white kids do it.
They're just going to make it super accessible to people, I guess, through this vision. It very much put together thing. Not something that just happened where these guys were just friends and they all decided, oh, we are all friends, we should get the same haircut and dress in this way. Like, this is a very specific, thought out thing. This is not organic. I think that is something that is oftentimes with the Beatles. People think everything was just organic. It was just, well, this is just the way they were.
Yeah.
They were friends. This is how they dressed.
I woke up like this.
Yeah, exactly. I woke up like this. But it's not.
Like John Lennon's Woo thing, that he just jacked from Little Richard. I'm pretty sure Little Richard taught him, or if Paul McCartney is the one that did that, I sincerely do not care. Whichever one of them was the one to do the woo in the songs that they took from Little Richard. They played a show with Little Richard, and Little Richard had to teach them how to do that. So yeah, that drives girls crazy. You can watch it on TV. Can we show Little Richard doing it to those girls and see what happens? Because I think they would die.
Yeah, history would be a little bit different
Yeah.
if Little Richard was doing the things that the Beatles were doing.
I mean, it would have gotten half the crowd pregnant right there, I think.
Probably true. I don't think it's probably true. It is true, hence why they wouldn't let him do it. So we've established here in the first couple minutes that the Beatles they have given us nothing of value as far as music is concerned.
Well, I mean, I'm not done.
I mean, there's plenty. But like from the get-go, from out the gate, there really is nothing to look back at and go, okay, the Beatles gave us X and blah, blah, blah. Well, besides boy bands. Maybe they paved the way for all your favorite boy bands. Thanks. Great. That's something to, I think, really to be proud of.
Well, I think there are other things that we still haven't talked about that people think the Beatles did first. People think the Beatles had the first concept album. That's not the case. Freak Out by the Mothers of Invention is way before that. And then if you want to go like real, I mean, it depends on how you define concept album. Some people think Woody Guthrie's Dust Bowl Ballads was the first concept album. Because that's another thing that people say about the Beatles is, okay, they weren't the first ones to do any of this stuff, but they were the first pop act to do this stuff.
Right.
And it's like, okay, well, the first person to take a tape and run it backwards in a recording studio happened 20 years before this. So why are we pretending like for
just
kids
being
doing
the first, it's something doesn't make you really good at it. If anything,
I do have one thing that the Beatles were the first one to do, though, which is, as far as I know, the first pop band to accidentally inspire murder, because Charles Manson thought that.
Right, that's right. Yeah,
I'll give them their credit where it's due.
I mean, listen, yeah, that's a really good credit. They deserve all the credit for inspiring murder. Thank you, Beatles, for taking the time to write your records and inspiring a murderer. Yeah, it is. It's such a thing that I hear so often is the Beatles were the first to blah, 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 blah. And I just don't think there's anything that they did first that really is something to be proud of.
And it's not like you have to be the first one to do something to be a good band or whatever. I think you and I would both agree that Led Zeppelin is fucking awesome. And they are guilty of 70% of everything that the Beatles are guilty of, except Led Zeppelin fucking rocked.
Right.
They stole blues music, but they added something to it rather than taking something away from it to make it more marketable. The Beatles are the first version of Kids Bop, man.
Right. Yes, I think that's actually a great way to put it, is they dumbed it down.
Took the balls
basically.
right out.
Right, exactly. Took the rock and roll, the edge of it right out of it, and just sold it as basically kiddie pop music. I think for some reason now we would look at something like 98 Degrees or the modern day boy bands in sync and go, oh, they were just manufactured pop music. Well, the Beatles were manufactured pop music too. They were just at the forefront of that before people even realized what was happening to them. It was a giant marketing scam, just like NSYNC or anything like that, before there was anything else to look back at, I guess, and say, well, this is just some giant marketing scam.
Well, but that's the thing, is the only thing that's new about this with the Beatles is that there are 4 of them. because Elvis Presley. Everyone involved in the Beatles was highly aware of that. I'm pretty sure John Lennon said that if there hadn't been an Elvis, there would be no Beatles. Elvis also sucks, but the point is that the Beatles they were not the first ones to do this. They just weren't, and I'm sorry if you thought they were.
The number one thing, for some reason, everyone thinks they were the first. I don't even really know. I guess boy band would probably be the first boy band.
I would say that's true. I would say they were the first boy band. The thing that I see people say they were the first band to make it popular to write your own songs. And they were the first group where, oh, look, it's a band and not one person and their band.
Right.
But that's not true. Country musicians were doing all of this. And people say, well, they were the first pop band. No, because country musicians were achieving crossover success into the pop world, doing all these same things. And the Beatles loved country music. So, sorry.
So one of the things I guess they could own is they were the first boy band. We could give them that credit. This is the question is that credit that you want? Is that a good thing? In my opinion, that's questionable. If not really questionable, I think it's not really something to be super stoked on if you're a fan of the Beatles.
If you have a marketing degree, it's fucking badass.
Sure.
Because that's all that a boy band is 75, 80% marketing. And they crushed that, but they had to teach people that that's what was going on. I mean, Beatlemania, whatever.
Right.
Sorry if you get mad at me, but you're gonna keep getting mad at me. Beatlemania was completely manufactured. They made Help and A Hard Day's Night. I don't know which one of those came first. But essentially what that was an instruction manual, a video clip instruction manual for the stop, drop, and roll generation of when the Beatles come to your town, this is how you are supposed to behave. Form into packs of wild female sexual energy and chase these young gentlemen down the road.
Right.
So I am not that impressed with the fevered fan reaction.
Because it's not organic.
No, you had to teach them.
It is, exactly. It is manufactured. Anyone listening to this, you're welcome to shoot us an email and just tell us, what are we missing? Because everything...
Indiana Jones has this same effect on women.
Right. Everything is manufactured. From the response that is expected from their fans, through videos and movies, whatever else, everything. Music, the marketing strategy behind it, the haircuts, everything is literally thought about beforehand. This is something that people do not want to acknowledge about the Beatles. They refuse to acknowledge. Like I said, people will look at, 98 Degrees, In Sync, and they will see that marketing ploy there. Some will, some won't. A lot of people do look at it and go, oh, that's a band that's been put together, whatever. They will not acknowledge the fact that the Beatles were a marketing ploy.
They are the pop Sex Pistols. As far as the fandom thing goes, you don't even have to go very far to find other examples. If you want to say that the Beatles are a great band because of Beatlemania, you have to say that Hulk Hogan is a great human being because of Hulkamania.
Right.
You have to say that Slotomania is a great app because my grandmother is addicted to it.
Right, yeah. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Mania does not equal awesomeness.
No. Why do you think that so many people credit the Beatles being as the first to do X, Y, or Z? Is it because
their music sucks, and that's the reason why they have... Well, it's like, okay, even if you don't like their music, you've got to admit they were one of the first ones to do this or that, and I do not have to admit that.
Yeah, and I'm not going to admit that because it's not true.
Well, they suck, and that's the problem with the Beatles is that most of their fans, you either like them for two reasons. The first reason is you think they were the first band to do something, and they literally were not. And so then the only other reason to like them is that you think they made good music. And I'm sorry to tell you this, but they did not.
Right. It's just odd that so many... total offense to everyone listening to this, if your favorite band is the Beatles, I kind of assume that you're an idiot. I mean, not an idiot. Your musical taste is skewed at the very most. I probably have very little respect for your musical taste if you just default to... my favorite band is the Beatles.
It is the default. It is the default answer.
Yeah, but that's such a cheesy answer.
It's entry level.
It is so entry level. If your favorite band is the Beatles, you really need to rethink what music and why you love music, if you even love music. I maybe it's fair to say favorite band is the Beatles. You don't actually love music. For me, it just sounds like a kid's music that children would listen to. That's what the Beatles are to me. I listen to the Beatles. I hear the Beatles and I go, I will play this for my son when he's 3.
Yeah.
Because this is something a 3-year-old would enjoy.
And then grow
There's
out
no
of.
heart. It literally is a kid's bop. It is kid's bop.
They were in the right place at the right time. If
Right.
technology was there, I know that if it hadn't been the Beatles, it would have been someone else.
Right.
And all you have to do is look at the industry that came up around just replicating what they had done.
Mm-hmm.
If the Beatles were in any way special, the Monkees should not have been a thing.
Right.
As soon as people could see what was happening on TV, how many of them were able to do the exact same thing? And even do the exact same thing while making fun of it, I would argue, which is what the Monkees were, kind of.
Poking fun at
A little bit of satire.
Sure.
Yeah, and I mean, also massively successful
Right.
because all you had to do was get actors to do this shit. It's okay, so even John Lennon would admit this. I became obsessed with just how much credit they were getting for what black musicians in America had done. I found a letter that John Lennon wrote to the New York Times in 1971 saying they would have copied those songs even more closely to the original if they could have. The implication being that they were not good enough to do them the right way.
Right.
So if they could have ripped it off more explicitly, then they would have. And then in the PS to that letter, he says in the 50s, when they were doing this, not even black kids liked the blues, which is fucking sane.
Yeah.
Just chess records.
Right.
Just chess records alone.
Sure.
And he says that they, never missed an opportunity to talk about how these songs were made by black people or whatever. Bullshit. I gotta call bullshit on this because,
Sure.
and he kind of like pulls the Rolling Stones in with him. If you go back and look it up, you can find footage of the Rolling Stones taking Howlin' Wolf on TV and showing everyone, look, this is the great guy. Like, you like our record? That's great. Buy this guy's music.
Right.
That's fucking awesome.
Sure.
The Beatles did not do that.
Never an acknowledgement of, the things that inspire them, I guess, partially inspire them to learn their instruments at 1/2 or 1/4 of the ability, or write songs at 1/3 of the ability of the people that they were inspired by.
And if you're listening to this and you do have an example of the Beatles doing that, they didn't do it good enough because I don't know about it.
Right. So the Beatles were one of the first, not the first, probably we could go back and find others that did similar, but took bluesy rock and roll and just dumbed it down. That's really all they did. It's just made it generic and accessible, acknowledging it in this letter, basically saying if they could have been better, they would have been, but they weren't. And at some point, it's easier to just be a boy band that's famous for having your haircuts the way that they are or whatever, than it is to be better at your instruments and be better songwriters. It's
Right.
easier. And at some point, probably very early on, especially when they started getting popular, it's easier to just do that for everything.
Yeah, well, because I would say 95% of Beatles fandom is projection.
Right.
It's projecting something that you think is in this music into it yourself. Right. It's just coming from you. And there's no better illustration of that than the fact that Charles Manson was able to project into this bland nothingness of content.
Right.
Oh, they're telling me to start a race war.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Helter Skelter is the song, in case anybody is wondering, that Charles Manson listened to and believed that there was inspiration there.
It was the whole album. He had a mythology built over the entire White Album, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, the Manson family had a girl named Sadie, and I think her nickname was Sexy Sadie or something. Mm-hmm. So then there's that song on that album. I didn't listen to any of this music beforehand, by the way. So I'm just gonna.
I didn't either.
I'm playing the pronoun game as hard as I can.
Yeah, if there's something we say wrong,
don't care.
Well, I don't really care.
Don't care.
It's the point that really matters here, which is they wrote a record. A man out there, his name is Charles Manson, listens to some songs. The music is so generic. It so lacks a direction that he was able to shape his own story over the top of it, which had probably nothing to do with what they were trying to say when they wrote it. He made his own story and, goes on to influence others to actually murder innocent people.
And
that's how generic it is, though.
So Hey Jude is supposed to be, Paul McCartney wrote Hey Jude for Julian Lennon because John Lennon was such a shitty father. So here's Paul looking at the relationship that his bandmate has with his child. And, you know, instead of doing the decent human being thing, if you really do think your friend is a shitty father
right.
and having a conversation with him, you passive aggressively write a song that is also not helpful. The lyrics of the song do not help Julian Lennon. Here's one of the lyrics, and I looked this up. I did not listen to the song, so if this is wrong, I mean, disclaimer again, we don't care. The movement you need is on your shoulder. What kind of advice is that? The movement you need is on your shoulder. What
does it even mean?
I don't know. I wish that Paul McCartney had taken that sad song and made it better.
Right.
That was a joke because the chorus of Hey Jude is take a sad song and make it better.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Did you get that?
Yeah, I did. No, I got it now. I didn't get it in the moment. That's my fault.
I would argue that the Beatles were not as influential as
right.
people say that they are. I think Bob Dylan was about 100 times more influential. You know, love him
sure.
or hate him. If you wrote lyrics to songs
right.
at the time, Bob Dylan changed your life and career trajectory far more drastically than the Beatles did with anyone.
Bob Dylan's influence would be throughout all of music, you know.
Yeah, not
like
just
far-reaching through all genres, across everything.
Poetry and prose as well. I mean, he changed the popular relationship people who construct literature have with the literature they construct. I feel like there wasn't enough general awareness of how the music business operates at the time for anyone to know the right questions to ask.
Right. Yeah, this is what's interesting is that we could have this conversation on the business side of it, and that's actually the genius part of it.
Oh, yeah.
This is more so on the art of what they've given us musically. If we're going to have another conversation about just the business side of it, yeah, of course it's genius because there's so much, but it's just business. It's just marketing. It's just this put together thing, which, yeah, if you like business is awesome. It's really interesting. If you like art and you like music, this is not the band that you need to be looking at going, I want to be like the Beatles. No, you don't actually.
Yeah, I mean, and I hope that anyone who's still listening to this feels that way about it. Right. I can't imagine who would listen to this far and not.
You should be questioning at this point everything about the Beatles.
And so then, I mean, if you really want to just talk about their music, if you want to get rid of all the social reasons, all the cultural reasons why what they were doing wasn't interesting, the actual music itself is not very good.
Right.
It's really not very good. And even when it is good, I would argue that the Beatles are not that responsible for it. One of the if I'm listening to a Beatles song and I'm like, oh, this is kind of nice. I like the string section there. Well, that's George Martin almost exclusively, who is arranging and conducting, I think, on these songs. Like incredible string arrangements. None of the people in the band had anything to do with it, and that's why people call George Martin the fifth Beatle, and he's not the only person that people call the fifth Beatle. So if the Beatles are so great,
a thing, right? Where there's multiple questions of who the fifth Beatle is.
Why do you need to have a fifth one? I mean, there
are bands that we are not going to be able to discuss on this podcast because they are actually the ones that did either as a band or there being one person in the band or whatever that was the artist, like truly an artist that was capable of not just writing a hook or a piece of a hook or a little guitar riff or something, but actually putting together all music. There's going to be a handful of people. Maybe one day we'll have a podcast where we actually discuss, a couple people that we don't talk about on the podcast for that very reason. We might have a podcast. Maybe it'll be 5 minutes long where we just list off bands that we'll never talk about.
Like Immunity.
Yeah, these are people that will be immune. We will never discuss them.
I'm not signing up for that, man.
Yeah, we're not going to try.
I'm not with you on that.
That's fair. I can appreciate that.
Okay, but if there was one person who I would give immunity to in the Beatles, it would be George Harrison.
Yeah, you mentioned that. You think George Harrison deserves some accolades.
Well, I think George Harrison being good is another example of how the Beatles sucked, because if the Beatles didn't suck, they would have recognized that we should let this George Harrison guy do everything.
Right.
That's not what happened. I think he sang on just a mere fraction of their songs, sang lead.
Why do you think that is?
Jealousy, insecurity.
100%. I was just going to say the same exact thing.
Lennon, McCartney being the songwriting partnership, and they know how much that publishing money is worth. I don't know what their if they split the, probably not.
Ego.
Yeah.
This is, I would guess that it was 100% ego. They were such obvious egomaniacs, even between Paul and John alone. The idea that another member of the band might actually have talent to do what they do.
Well, and apparently that was the situation from the beginning.
Right.
Apparently George Harrison just could shred.
Right.
And he was younger than everyone else, I think.
Right.
So, yeah, it was just, they probably were just trying to like hold him back.
How big do you think George Harrison his career would have been outside the Beatles had he...
Well, I mean, we don't have to postulate. We can just look at it. I mean, the motherfucker, like the concert for Bangladesh, the audience is gigantic in that. I don't know, but I guess Wings probably...
I was going to say, do we credit... Wings is bigger.
I refuse to give credit to commercial success equaling, talent.
No, we don't. We definitely don't.
Yeah.
No, because we wouldn't have anything to talk about, because a lot of the things that we're going to talk about, in coming episodes would be bands that probably have huge commercial success that are just garbage.
I fucking hate them all.
I mean, there's so many.
And then here's where we get into the second phase of the problem, which is drugs. And everyone who likes we'll call it the second half, I don't really care how much of it was, but the second phase of their career when they start doing drugs.
Right.
First of all, Bob Dylan got him stoned for the first time. So another American.
I had no idea.
Yeah, another American just being like, hey, guess what we're doing over here?
Right.
And they get high and
Boom.
it's like, oh, our music does suck. Let's make different music.
Right.
What's happening in San Francisco?
Right.
And so then they go listen to psychedelic music being made by everyone else, ripping off Brian Wilson so hard.
Sure.
So hard.
And again, doing the exact same thing that they had done originally, which is just making it even generic. Like this, it's like there's like this filter for simplification. It's like,
no, that's literally what it is.
That's what they did. They took everything that they liked or they heard somebody else doing and just simplified it.
And people want to say that they deserve credit for doing that.
Right.
And I would argue, fuck you.
Yeah, that's insane.
I would argue...
It doesn't even make sense.
Is BuzzFeed.com your favorite website?
Right.
If yeah, fuck you.
Right.
If no...
Exactly.
If no, then
Right.
this is what we're talking about.
Right.
They're a fucking content aggregator,
Exactly.
man.
It's like I don't want to read the New York Times article because it's 300 words long. I'm going to read the Hill or BuzzFeed's version, which is 25 words long.
Yeah.
But it leaves out all the meat of the things that you really need to know. They literally did the exact same thing.
It's the difference between a WAV file and an MP3 file.
Right.
Just how much information is there. And it could be emotional information, intellectual information.
Right.
I want to take a second to make sure that we point out, if you go on your Facebook right now and make a post about how you think the Beatles were an overrated band or something, you will be buried under a mountain of comments, assuming that you're only doing that to troll people or to be edgy or because you think it makes you an outsider or different or cool or a rebel. But this is a conversation that we should be allowed to have, I think, without that happening. Because I have not said anything inflammatory.
No.
I don't think I've said anything outrageous.
No, everything we've said is actually things that we looked up. We looked up stories. We beyond what our own personal opinions are to develop even more of an understanding of the band that sucks. That everyone.
I think that we need to find out if we're allowed to use music clips in this podcast. Because if we can play little segments of music and then just talk about why they are garbage.
Oh my gosh.
I think that would go a long way.
Yeah. Well, we probably know enough people. We can have somebody that's like a really crazy writer or I don't know. There's probably a bunch of people that we know that could really pick apart like the specifics of why they recorded things a certain way or what the tone they used and why it was generic or bad or where they got it from.
I don't think you have to be a musician to know what good music is or even recognize where the influences come from. Specifically, Pet Sounds versus Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, I believe is the full name of that.
It's so pretentious.
Ridiculous album. People want to act like Brian Wilson believing that he was in some sort of production battle with the Beatles means that the Beatles were good or means that the Beatles were a worthy adversary. And people act like Sgt. Pepper's came out after Pet Sounds and caused Brian Wilson to go crazy because of how much better it was than Pet Sounds. And I'm sorry, Brian Wilson was already crazy.
Yeah.
So the fact that Brian Wilson thought this was his competition is not a great argument in your favor. That's like...
No, if anything, if you hold that standpoint, it's from almost a complete ignorance of reality.
Yeah.
Complete. And I would argue, if you're going to rip off one or the other, rip off Brian Wilson.
Pet Sounds is so much better than Sgt. Pepper's.
There's really no comparison.
On every level, too.
Yes.
Because
and arguably, in my opinion, way more influential and way more ripped off. People rip off Pet Sounds like
for
crazy.
Sure.
I don't think people rip off Sgt. Pepper.
No, because it's gimmicky.
Right.
Like Pet Sounds uses the studio. This is the thing that people say the Beatles were one of the first ones to use the studio as an instrument. That's garbage, first of all. That's not the case. Second of all, they didn't do it well. Brian Wilson did it extremely well because, for one thing, he was starting with fantastic songs. You can take the songs on Pet Sounds, for the most part, and just play them on an acoustic guitar, and they still work as great pieces of music. And then when you take his understanding of sound and what he was doing with the arrangements, what he was asking, some of the greatest musicians in music at the time were in the recording studio with him. And these people are blown away by what Brian Wilson is asking them to do. It blows their mind that they would ask him. They asked the bass player, who actually I just said him, I think it was a woman, in the Wrecking Crew maybe. They ask her to play the bass part in a different fucking key than the rest of the song. And they're just like, what? Why? No, I'm not. And then they do it. And then they're just like, okay, I don't understand why this sounds amazing, but it does. And Brian Wilson knew that it would.
Right.
That's as opposed to the Beatles going into a studio and turning knobs. Be like, hey, we're high. Fuck it. Let Ringo sing one.
Right.
How is this even? Why are we even talking about this, Mark?
Yeah. It's you cannot escape the Beatles. Even today, I had a really brief meeting. There was a picture of John Lennon on the wall in the place that I was having the meeting. They're unavoidable.
Did that bum you out?
It did. I do wonder, and I know that we idolize all sorts of people for all sorts of reasons, but John Lennon wasn't exactly some prime example of this great person that we should look up to. And not that we should always hold everyone to that standard or whatever, but it is weird how he's become a demigod now in music and all these things. And the reality is like what we're talking about. They inspired Charles Manson to do horrible things. They write kids bop music. They inspired boy bands, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing is, what's interesting is when I was reading about some of the stuff too with when they started getting into drugs, it just also got even weirder. But it's like the generic weirder, of course. But there's just then they like conspiracy theories, and it almost like became like a joke of itself, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, it all fell apart because they got high and basically realized they fucking hated each other.
Right. They couldn't handle their drugs. This is like rock and roll 101. Handle your shit.
Yeah, keep your shit together.
You can't handle your shit.
I heard that one time John Lennon was tripping on acid and called an emergency meeting of the entire band at their record company to tell them that while tripping on acid, he realized he was the reincarnation of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, whatever, dude.
I mean, here's the thing: is who the hell could even get away with that now?
I could probably find a list of 25 people who've said that.
What would the Beatles have been like if social media had existed?
So
they wouldn't have had John wouldn't be going and having an emergency meeting with the Beatles to tell them that he's Jesus Christ because he's tripping on acid. He would just be tweeting it or posting it on Instagram. Like,
he would have gotten in so much trouble.
People would hate the Beatles if they existed today. In that. These stories we wouldn't be looking back at these stories. These stories would be happening in the public spotlight now.
He did get in some hot water for saying that the Beatles were bigger than Jesus, but but the people he got in hot water with for saying that were uptight conservatives.
Right.
The real person that John Lennon was he was a bastard.
Right.
Just personally, on a personal level, he seems like he was a bastard.
There's an infinite amount of stories that talked about how bad he was.
Yeah,
how shitty of a person he was.
The controversy that he would cause if he had social media. I mean, I heard that John Lennon hit Yoko.
Right.
I don't know if that's true.
Yeah.
But the parallel I want to draw right now is to Chris Brown.
So the thing is that if social media had existed, it's something that I think is worth talking about a little bit because. You know, you hear about all these crazy stories, how eccentric they were, the stories about the drugs. And Matt, if social media existed, I think people would hate them. I think at least their target audience by that time, which is probably a little bit older.
I don't know what phase of their career we're talking about right now, but
it would have been later, I guess, probably in their career.
Yeah, okay, so after the drugs, they get into the Maharesh, I'm not even going to try to say the rest of that guy's name, I don't know, the meditation guru, transcendental meditation,
right,
which is what they claim is what allowed them to stop doing drugs, which I would question that.
Maybe different drugs.
I don't know. But then this guy wants money from him, and he wants more money and more money and more money. Right. And then they're like, maybe we should like step away from this dude. But how many people had they already influenced to join this guy's meditation cult, basically? And if this happened on Twitter, they would be put on blast for that. We're talking like Ty Lopez.
Right, yeah.
Don't sue me, Ty Lopez.
Imagine if your favorite artist right now, whoever they happen to be, started tweeting or posting on social media that you needed to start following some guru, modern day guru, whoever it be, that everyone else might probably look at and go, that person's crazy or is obviously just a scam artist. And you're one of the biggest bands in the world out there pushing some sort of bullshit. And then this person just turns out to be literally a scam artist who just keeps asking for more and more and more and more money. Yeah. I mean, thank God that social media didn't exist. God only knows what kind of damage they would have done.
I'm trying to think of another parallel, and it's difficult.
Can't. Well, this exact situation, I believe, has even been mocked in other movies where the band goes to some guru guy.
The Strokes' first album, I think they had a picture of someone that they called their guru in there, and I was never quite clear on whether that was a joke or not.
Right. One would hope. Well, and here's the thing: is people are welcome, of course. You're free to believe whatever bullshit you want to believe. That's fine. But the Beatles at that point, this is probably a little bit later in their career, had so much influence and power. God only knows what kind of damage they could have done as far as like getting people to sign up now. The reach that they could have, the damage they could do would be unbelievable.
I'm glad. Actually, I wish the Beatles hadn't broken up.
Sure.
Because then Wings wouldn't have happened.
Right. Fair. Well, one of the things that where we live, we live
Nashville. I'll give you my address if you want to come talk about this.
Yeah, we live in Nashville, Tennessee, which is the home of lots of interesting music. But one of the things that I have experienced, I don't know if you've experienced, is you can almost tell just by walking around, what somebody's wearing, if they're gonna, I could probably, this is how cultish the Beatles are in some way, shape, or form. You could walk down the street or go to East Nashville, which is a trendy part of town, and I could find you and point out the people that like the Beatles. There is an image, there is a look, that floppy hat look.
You mean just trends, just people who follow trends?
Yes.
Then yeah.
Because it's such a piece of that puzzle of like that image, the floppy hat. I don't really know what else they wear specifically anymore, but I almost guarantee you they're going to default automatically to say the Beatles is the best band ever or Beatles is their favorite band. Almost guaranteed. It's
the equivalent of walking up to someone at a bar like, "What's up? You like music? Yeah. Me too."
Yeah. Great. That's really, really useful information. Man, they really did nothing of value.
Just marketing, though. I mean, I'll give them full.
Yeah, we're
gonna
give them.
That.
We're gonna give them full credit on just being a money-making machine.
They took scary Elvis the Pelvis, the sex monster guy,
right.
neutered the fuck out of that, and then made 4 of them.
Yeah,
and gave them
shitty haircuts,
real bad haircuts, like so bad. We didn't even talk about fashion at all.
That's what I'm saying. There's an entire universe, like a culture that has been created from the Beatles.
Can you imagine just sitting in a coffee shop at the time and watching people just come in the door dressed that way? Like, dude, here's another one of these fucking assholes.
Seriously. It is like Urban Outfitters before Urban Outfitters exist. They were like the first Urban Outfitters. Okay, like they created, they're literally the reason for, in my mind, hipster everything.
Do you remember like the Backstreet Boys album Millennium and how they dressed all shiny clothes?
Oh, yeah.
So what if you were out in public and you saw people just walk in? Like, just like,
sure.
That would be the same thing,
It's
right?
the exact same thing. You would immediately look at someone with a stupid-ass haircut like they had and go, this person's an idiot. Or whatever else they, fashion-wise were doing. You would judge them. I would judge them, for sure.
On one level, it's cool because you know not to even...
Talk to them.
Yeah, get invested.
Acknowledge them.
Oh, it was nice of you to label yourself for me so that I know who you are.
You made it so easy for me not to want to talk to you. And that is actually how I feel about when I see people wearing floppy hats. I know we're not going to be friends.
You've got it in for these hats.
I do. I really hate them. I really hate them. And it's because I thought the trend was going to go away, and yet we still are. It's at this point, it's late in 2017, and we still see him quite a bit. I assume you're a generic person. When I see it, I just do.
I'm not sure I even know what we're talking about. You might have to show me a picture later.
Yeah. It's a Beatles fan. That's who it is.
I can't believe we've been talking about this for this long. It's like
I feel like we even barely scraped the surface. I think we may be able to come back to this at some point down the road and really expand on the fact that there's so many people. I think here's an experiment for everybody that's listening. You should do two things. A, you should agree with us that the Beatles suck and they're overrated. You should at this point. But you should post on your Facebook wall or your Twitter or whatever social media is popular where you are, that you think the Beatles suck.
Post this episode of this podcast.
Post this podcast first and say you agree with us.
Yeah.
And then post that the Beatles suck and see what kind of responses that you get. Second of
people
all,
who won't even listen to it and won't even pay attention.
No, they won't even acknowledge. They'll think that we're trolling.
Exactly.
But they haven't listened to it. Exactly. If they did, they would maybe change their opinion. But then ask also, I think it's worth asking if you ask someone who their favorite band is, they say the Beatles, ask them what they think about Brian Wilson. Ask them what they think about Pet Sounds. Ask them, because I would bet at least half of the people that I would ask, knowing full well they're going to say the Beatles, because I can look at you and tell you're going to say the Beatles, may not even know who Brian Wilson is, because that's the generic level of people that like the Beatles, in my opinion. We do actually have something to thank the Beatles for. If it were not for the Beatles, you and I would never have had the idea to sit here and have this conversation, to educate the people listening to this podcast.
That's true, but I know who I am and I know who you are. We would have found something else to complain about.
Else to talk about. Yeah. That's for sure.
Well, do you have anything to plug? Are you working on anything that people who listen to this might be interested in?
No. This is all I do is think about the Beatles and how much I hate them. Well, that's literally how I have spent my entire week leading up to this.
That's impressive.
Yeah, I will have some things coming up at some point that I want to talk about, but not today. What about you?
I think I'll wait and listen to this and see if it's good first, and then associate other things with.
That's fair. That's a really safe bet. That's a way safer thing to do it. You don't want to talk about some of the things you're doing because you're unsure if it's going to be good.
We'll find out.
All right. Well, until next time.
Thank you for listening to the first episode of Your Favorite Band Sucks. Hopefully we gave you a little bit more than you were expecting. This wasn't just a the Beatles are overrated man argument. We really went for it with this one. If you are a Beatles fan and you made it this far, Mark called you stupid, so you probably want to send him an email. You can do that at info@yfbspod.com. That's the show's initials and POD for podcast. Yeah, Mark also said that we were going to put some links on the website. I'll guess I'll do that, but don't expect that shit for every episode because I don't really care. YFBS is also our username on Twitter. You can't have the letters F and B next to each other in a Facebook page username, so just search for the show name, I guess, or who cares. All right, if you like this, please share it with someone. That's it.